Welcome back. As we continue our look at the impact of concussions and post-concussion syndrome on the lives of football players past and present, there's a dollars and cents component to this too. The lawsuit the NFL is now facing may well change the way the game is played, not just in the pro ranks, but just in football as we know it in this country. I'm talking about the amateur level, from college, high school, and even to the youth levels. As more information about protecting players is discovered, we might be seeing here changing the way the game is played on all levels, as I said, from top to bottom. There is also, though, another huge concern here which comes to the insurance and the insuring of players. No matter age or skill level, nobody disputes the NFL makes a lot of money, almost $10 billion a year here, and they could afford maybe some of the added expenses of insuring its players. Maybe. It'd be prohibitive, but still, they could at least do it. But what about college teams? Forget about even D1 teams. Imagine D2, D3. What about high school teams? They barely have enough budgets to afford any sports right now. How are they going to afford this? And what about youth leagues like Pop Warner? Might the cost of both protecting and later treating players who suffer from these long-term injuries here be too much for those leagues and organizations to pay? Will the burden fall to parents, or will just the rising costs come some groups altogether to give up the game or just make it touch football? In the process, change what is become a way of life for some families and some communities in the process. And for more, we're pleased to be joined by Robert Boland. He's a sports lawyer and professor of sports management and law at NYU. And Robert has negotiated more than 100 player and endorsement contracts in a variety of sports, including the NFL. Robert, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Rich. It's my pleasure.
You know, when I saw the autopsy reports of Junior Seau, it confirmed what many had expected. For some reason, one of the first things I thought of was an article that I saw you appear in the Times 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it really spoke to the viability of not just the NFL, but football from the youth level all the way up through college and obviously to professional ranks here. It seems one of the things that's come out most recently with Junior Seau, and obviously with this pending lawsuit, is no longer can leagues or any level of football claim ignorance that they didn't know there was a cause and effect with some of the head trauma and the concussions that come along with football. Could you give an idea to our audience how it's not just the pending lawsuit against the NFL, but some of the precedents that are going to be set really for all levels of football here, and how it might materially change things?
Well, Rich, that's a great question. I think one of the things that it extends far beyond football. We all have always known that running into hard objects with our head is not a safe practice, but one of the challenges we've had is that in football we weren't sure how damaging concussions were, we weren't sure how often they took place, and we weren't sure what the lasting and sustained effect of them were historically. And I think one of the things the plaintiffs in the NFL lawsuit all claim that somebody knew somewhere along the line and that they concealed this knowledge. And that's the fact that the plaintiffs would have to prove to win this case, and that may still make this lawsuit a long shot. But as you asked me directly, the problem is now that we look at these damages and we look at concussions being so rampant and such a major factor in contact and collision sports, but also in sports that don't have some of those same elements like soccer, the cost of insuring those sports and insuring against these kind of injuries is going to grow exponentially. So this can have an effect far greater than just costing the NFL $1 billion, and as a $10 billion entity, that's really not a very big number. It really can affect whether schools and youth programs can exist the way they do now in almost every sport.
You know, we come off obviously just the bowl season right now, and you could argue that when you're a school in the SEC or a Notre Dame, you know, they're huge revenue generators. But just at the college level, I know how budgets have been pared. In our region, Hofstra, for example, even shut down its program. When we're talking about a real number here, Bob, in terms of, you know, premiums would go up. They might try and exclude concussions, which would obviously open themselves up. And then you go to the high schools that in some cases can't even afford an athletic program, let alone arts or whatever, or even to Pop Warner. There becomes a viability issue. You can't ask parents to sign a waiver they won't sue. It doesn't work that way. There's a real dollars and cents consequence here, isn't there?
The reason that college football has fared reasonably well, even as a non-revenue sport, is it does have a positive effect on enrollment management for men. But if it becomes exponentially expensive, increases so much because of insurability, schools that aren't making a profit from it, and we're talking about schools that make a profit from it being maybe 50 of the biggest universities, will probably have to walk away from it or really scale it back. And if you're talking about it in the high school ranks and any public university where budgets are tighter and tighter and families are being asked to pay more and more in taxes and get less for that service, that's enormously costly. So there's no way to insure against these injuries, and you're right, insurers will be walking away or asking to disclaim any protection for head injuries from almost all sports, I think, in the coming years, and there's really not a lot you can do to protect it. I think everybody in all sports right now is doing a very, very good job and is very cognizant of what the risks of head injuries are. The problem is if insurers won't pay for them or pay for the damages or pay for medical care related to them, that makes the cost of those sports almost exponentially expensive, as you say. So your question was spot on.
And you know, Bob, the hard part is for anybody who's played sports, especially contact sports, knows unless you come up with a magic helmet, no matter how much you try and legislate it out of the game, you can't legislate it completely out of the game. And it goes beyond, as you said, football. I mean, what are you going to do in hockey? You're going to take checking out of it? In soccer, you're going to take heading out of the game? I mean, people think, I'm being, just dramatic for dramatic purposes. But that literally might be some of the metrics people are going to have to figure out if they're going to keep playing the sport. What are you going to do? Have tag football, I guess, at the high school level? These are some of the mathematical decisions some schools are going to have to make here because of the cost realities potentially.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It is not limited to any one sport. It has universal impact across the board with regard to all sports and all schools and anybody and the costs of participating in sports. So there's no way to legislate it out. I mean, I also played an era where the helmet technology got better and better, and it became much more able to use as a weapon. In fact, if you look at some of the medical studies of the injuries, they're confined to some technological developments. Although the other problem we have, or the other issue that goes concomitant with this, that's happening right at the same time, is the idea we're becoming so much more aware of the concussion issue. Brendan Shanahan, a longtime NHL player who's now in charge of discipline for the NHL and cleaning up the game, had a great comment. He said, 5 years ago, I would have told you with a concussion play. Now I would tell you broken leg play, broken head sit. And that's one of the challenges of the concussion idea is that no one knows what they are, what one is. There's no medical test for it. It's a perception and it's a relative term, and we have no idea what their long-term effects are, and we're just coming to grips with that right now. So the hope is that sports will survive this time of great crisis, and we'll come out of this with much clearer ideas moving forward.
But one thing we do know is the liability issue attached to this will become a front and center issue. Bob, thanks very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, keep the conversation going online. We're going to have a table talk right after this.